start the get ourselves going here, and let's start with a quick introduction. So I'm Ed Cook, and with me is Roxanne Brown, and
Hello.
we are excited to talk to you about this whole stakeholders and moving to a hybrid work environment. So I'll be on my computer chatting with people. Roxanne will be driving a lot of what we're talking about today, and please pop questions into the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and ask a question, that's great, and we'll leave time at the end for thoughts and questions as well. And we look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. All right, over to you, Roxanne.
Great. So as I said, we've been interviewing people for a while, asking them what joy at work means to them based on an experience that Ed and I had 10 years ago working on a team that was in pretty bad shape morale-wise, and was working on something pretty hard, and we were able to really transform the mood and morale of the team, and that was such an incredible experience for us. We've been studying what joy at work means to people ever since, trying to figure out what happened, what did we do right, how can we replicate this, and how can we help others get it. So joy at work means different things to different people, but these are the themes that seem to come out the strongest. So just wanted to share that with you at the top. So we're going to talk about, let me get here. We're talking about managing the impact to your stakeholders when you're moving to a hybrid workplace. There was a time, it seems, when people were thinking that maybe the work from home remote situation would be temporary. I think every one of us thought that at some point, and then slowly over time, it's become more and more permanent in a way to this, at least a hybrid place for lots of people. So hybrid means different things to different people, different organizations. So if you are moving to a hybrid workplace, or you're in the middle of it, understanding how your stakeholders are impacted can be pretty important. Before I go into the content, what I just wanted to quickly share is that we have lots of webinars that we do on the concept of change leadership and change analytics. So we do webinars twice a month, one on each of these topics. So please feel free to come to future sessions. All right, so one of the things that we ask people is, what value people get from their workspace, their physical workspace, and these are the things that come up. They want a place to gather and collaborate and a place to focus. One of the things that has come through loud and clear is that it's great to meet with people virtually. It's great to be able to connect that way. But if I'm going into the office, I want the ability to collaborate with others. And also I want a place to focus. We've learned that working from home can be good for many, but sometimes it can be a hard place to find quiet. So it just, again, is unique to each individual. So what people are saying is that physical workplace enables in-person collaboration and virtual collaboration with people who are not there, privacy, so that focus, and movement, right? So a lot of times we aren't actually moving around when we're working from home. We sit and we go from next call to the next call. Anyway, so I thought just drop in some of the things that people have said about what they value in a physical workplace. They still value that, is what we're learning. So we want to talk in terms of how you're managing the impact to stakeholders. And so the first thing we want to talk about is you in this situation are likely to be leading that if you're interested in this. So we think of change leaders as their role is to create the conditions to make it easier for people to do things in a new way that will achieve the value of the change that you're seeking, right? So if you are seeking people to have a hybrid situation, you're a hybrid work situation, maybe that means coming in certain days of the week or some sort of percentage, or every other week, who knows, could mean lots of things. There's a value you're looking for, for that change. So you can ask yourself, what value am I seeking? And then how can I make it easier for people to change? And some of the examples that we would give about what leaders can do to create the conditions are these, right? Telling stories about the big picture, explaining why, making sure it's clear what's important, and why it's important, amplifying progress that you're making, acknowledging what's in the way, right? And then doing something about it. And then, of course, tuning in to what's at stake for people you want to change. So that's the impact assessment that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I think just an interesting thing on that. So for people that do change work and you talk about doing an impact assessment, that makes sense and may seem obvious to you. I'll just tell you from my point of view, before I became exposed to this at all, it was really Roxanne walking me through this idea of an impact assessment when I was leading a very big team of a couple hundred people. And it was not at all obvious to me that such a thing would be something we would do. But it certainly did once she explained it to me. So it's just something to think about in terms of perspective, that you may have to explain to someone why it is you want to do that. And not that it won't land quickly, but it may not be obvious to them that such a thing is going to be valuable.
Great. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of tuning in, and then give you something practical to do. Then I'm going to talk about setting an intention, which gets to much more practical. And then I'm going to talk about, what you already know and how you can get help from your team. So that's how this talk will lay out. So first thing is about tuning in. So what's happening today? What are the distractions and concerns? If you think about a person at work, they're really kind of divided. The brain is divided into three categories. These kinds of categories is a way to think about it. So first is the work itself, right? Or the work that they're doing to create value and achieve the goals of the company. And I would argue that that would be the statements that we saw up front. The joy at work is they're actually in there doing things, creating value, creating something good, something useful, creating value for themselves and people that they're doing work for. So that's the work itself. But then there are these other two things, right? There's the internal strife, right? Which is often about, interaction with colleagues, interaction with the boss, interaction with a company. So that's something that people are always thinking about. How am I managing that? And how am I impacted by that? And then there's the external, right? What's going on in the environment? That could be a threat to the company, a threat to my employment, right? There's the external forces as well. Well, certainly the pandemic has come through loud and clear as an external force, but there could be lots of external forces like impact to an industry could be, certainly an example of it. So if you think about how your employees' brain is divided, how much would you say they're focused on the work itself versus on these other two things? So let's talk about what could get in the way. So certainly what can get in the way is decision fatigue related to hybrid. And these are some of the questions that people are asking themselves. Will I be required to work in the office? Is the company going to be taking precautions? And then there's some other things like fairness, right? Are the rules going to be different for me than for other people? And then there's this mistrust related to the vaccine that certainly comes through, and a choice about how I want to be able to choose. There's certainly been, will the company terminate me if I don't get the vaccine? That's been something that's come out recently. And then a lot of people are asking, do I even like my job? Do I want to work here? Can I go somewhere else? What options do I have? So that's a lot of stuff that people are thinking about that they don't normally think about. They might think about that last one, right? Do I even like my job? But certainly the trend is that people are thinking about it much more so than they have in the past, especially given all the change that people have experienced personally in individual ways over the last couple of years. So that's definitely contributing to the distraction. The other thing that's going on is the hybrid culture characteristics, right? So hybrid culture, you could say, looks a lot like this. It's definitely people are more adaptable, right? They've had to change. It's more independent. People are, kind of left to their own devices and focused on their own thing. This culture is also less influential, generally speaking. People talk a lot about, I'm losing my culture. I don't feel like the company's culture is as strong. The other thing that's happening is things are less clear, right? So because companies are changing their business models, kind of taking advantage of things that are showing up as opportunities, but also in that survival mode, some of the things that employees used to use as clues for what they should be working on are less clear. Like, is this really a priority, or is that a priority that's changing for the company? Certainly more intense, right? It can be one meeting after another phone call, more deadlines. People talk about the longer days. It can feel less fair, right? So maybe if you're in the office and you happen to run into someone and that's maybe an executive, you got to have a connection with them that maybe people that weren't there that day didn't have that connection. There are all kinds of fairness things that come into play. More focused, that follows nicely with the more intense, right? You can be really focused on the next goal and the next goal and the next goal, but also can feel less connected, right? There's less of that in between, get to know you, stop by the hallways, let's go have lunch kind of thing. There's that piece is missing. But of course, it's more flexible, right? So flexible can be good and flexible can be bad, right? In a way, it can result in a longer work day. So when you think about this, what's interesting is in many ways it's psychologically unsafe. It's also similar to distributed team culture. So if you've ever been on a team where the people who are on the team aren't necessarily physically located in the same place, a lot of this is in play. So it may feel familiar. It would be actually just useful for you to remember, oh yeah, we experienced some of this in the team I was on before, and what did we do about that? Or what might I reflect on that was good and bad that we did to make it better for everyone? So just to give you something very quick right off the bat of what you can do in this situation is think about misunderstanding. So in this situation, misunderstandings or risk is much higher than usual. And that's true of distributed teams as well. So we always say spend more time communicating than you ever did before when you're on a distributed team. That's true here. And the idea is, communication is always something people talk about. Yeah. What we're saying is say it often, say it all the time. In other words, if you think you're over communicating, good. Keep doing that. So be clear about what's important and not important. Be clear about what's changing and not changing, and repeat yourself. Because oftentimes people will want to hear that this thing that isn't changing is still not changing, right? It brings calm to the situation when you reconfirm that. So even if you feel like you're repeating yourself, that's okay.
Also, something that I would say was not obvious to me, and I think not obvious to others, is to come back and communicate that I don't have something else to communicate. And just the act of doing that provides some calm and certainty. And again, you guys might know that, and that may be obvious. People you're working with or trying to guide through something like this, maybe not so much. So it could be useful to let them know or even remind them that that's a useful technique.
Yeah, and we're not suggesting to patronize anyone, right? That people are smart. What we're suggesting is to anything you can do to bring calms or take them out of that place of focus on external forces and internal strife and focus on the work itself. That's the goal in your communication. So let's talk about setting an intention. So how are people impacted, and how do you want the change process to feel? So this is where we get to more specifics about the impact assessment. First, I wanted to share some philosophy with you. We think of this kind of progression that when you can build psychological safety, that means interpersonal risk-taking is not, it's okay to do that, right? And that's going to or connecting to things like being myself at work and belonging here. when people have that feeling of interpersonal risk taking is okay, over time, emotional capital is built, right? And then you have that trusting relationship, which leads to joy, that emotional connection. So that emotional capital is something, like I said, you build over time. And so this is something to pay attention to. When something bad happens in the office, maybe some sort of bad news or some sort of decision that you have to make that's not going to be popular, if you have a lot of emotional capital to draw from, then the ability for people to bounce back or roll with it is just higher. So this is how we think of how joy at work is built over time. So one of the things I wanted to bring forward is what can get in the way. And this is something you may or may not know about, which is from David Brock. It's called the SCARF model. And for those of you who do remember it, this is just a reminder of, it's always good to look at things like this. I think this was produced like in 2008 or so, so the early 2000s. So one of the things David Brock says is when these concepts are impacted, people either move away or move toward. So in other words, if my status is impacted negatively about, questioning my value, then I feel a threat. If my value is recognized, then I move toward. And same thing with certainty, right? So I know where I stand, I know how things will happen. If I feel that's threatened, I'll step back. And if I feel like, oh, I know what's happening, then I'll move forward. So that goes to the repeating yourself thing. Same thing with autonomy. People want autonomy. They want to have choice. They want to belong, and they want fairness. So these are the things that come into play whenever change is introduced. Certainly in the hybrid situation, these things are going to get plucked. So it's useful for you to know about this, because then you can ask yourself, well, how might these things be coming into play for my team or for an individual who might be struggling with it? And digging into it a little bit more can lead you to some interesting insights about what you might be able to do to make it easier for them to make the change you need them to make. So this is a model just to either remind you about or to introduce you to, because it's very useful. And then these are the change leaders impact assessment questions that we would recommend whenever you are introducing change. So what do I need people to do differently? From their perspective, how big a deal is it? What is their expected reaction? Why do I think it's going to be that way? What changes are in recent memory and how did that go? What would successful transition look like for them, and what would make it easier for them to change? So on that question 4, what changes are in recent memory? That one is really interesting because if you've had a change in the recent past that hasn't gone well, people will remember that. And it's really useful for you to acknowledge, hey, this didn't go well, and we've learned from it, and these are the things we're going to go do differently. If it has gone well, that's a great thing to point to. Hey, this change we did, we felt like it went really well, and we're going to do these things in this situation as well, and that will build confidence. So these questions can lead to some really great insights about how people are impacted.
Yeah, I would say continue to be happily surprised by leaders that we work with as we go through these, that they find insights that they just didn't have before, mostly because they just weren't thinking about it, right? They're busy and you got all these other things to go do. And you pose these questions to them, you can see them just sort of sit back and think about it for a little bit and come up with some insights that they just really weren't able to bring to the fore just because of all the other things that they're doing. And so there's a bunch of value in getting them in this mode of kind of contemplating what's going on with that, really thinking about what does this change mean to these people and what is the impact to them. So then you can start thinking about what are they going to do? How can they jump in and do something useful with all that?
Right. And don't worry so much about getting all the answers right. You may not know the answers to these questions. That's not really the point. The point is for you to ask yourself these questions so that you can sort of tune into what their perspective is. It's really empathy in practice is what we say. When you start to notice your answers, you might come up with some obvious things you can do in response. Or you might say, I really don't know the answers to that. How could I find out? Maybe I should go talk to them and try to understand. A great way to do that is to say, hey, I think this is the way you're impacted. Can you help me understand if I've gotten that right? So just a simple approach like that can make a huge difference in how people take it in. The other thing we would recommend that you do is set an intention. So how do I want everyone to experience the change process, and what would help them feel that way? Not the change itself, right? So how do I want people to feel about moving to a hybrid workplace, way of working? You can ask yourself that, but we would more have you ask yourself how you want people to feel about the process of moving to that. The reason for that is people don't really have a say in what the change is, but they definitely can have a say in how the change is implemented. So you can think about how you want them to experience that, and that will lead to, okay, well, what kinds of things can I help people feel this process is, fair, or whatever those things are for you. When you look at something like this, and even the questions before, you might think this is very, touchy-feely. You might think this is maybe too much on the emotion side. What I would say is this is very much like the empathy mapping in design thinking. If you're familiar with design thinking, there's an empathy mapping process where it's about product development and product launch, trying to tune into what the customer wants and how the company wants the customer to feel, and how they want them to interact with the product. It's similar. You're tuning into people's feelings. It's similar in trying to understand this situation with employees. The other thing we would say is that when you pay attention to how people feel and you treat them with respect, that's a long-term play. And again, goes to building up emotional capital over time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to do that. And again, something for where a leader doesn't really necessarily take that on, and helping people connect into that idea that drives the entire work can be really valuable. This notion of an intention.
Exactly. So we think it's worth the effort, because when you set an intention for how you want the process itself to feel and how you want it to go for people, that leads you to ask yourself, well, how will I know that's happening? And you'll be able to identify some signs for you that that's what's happening, right? So you'll be able to understand, okay, so if I want them to feel it's fair, how will I know that that's how they feel? How would they be acting? What would they be saying that tells me that? Also, by setting an intention like that, again, empathy in practice, it keeps you out of the typical ways of thinking about change. Often people think about change as hopeless, right? Things like people hate change, they resist change, etc. If you think that way, then it doesn't really help. Actually, it hurts your ability to make the change go well if you think it's hopeless. If you think, oh, this is my intention, this is how I want it to go, even this change that's unpopular, it makes a huge difference in how the change goes, because you are, your words and your actions are governed by this intention that you've set. And so what we say here at the bottom of thinking that people hate change means there's little chance that behavior will be seen in any other way. So if you think that people don't like change, it'll be hard for you to see anything else in people. And so this leads to our big philosophy that we say all the time, that people are not usually upset by what is changing. People get upset by how it's handled. And that goes to this idea that most people understand that companies are going to change, right? Most people even want to be part of companies that are evolving and progressing. It's not really about that. It's always about how it's handled. So you can have a change that's really popular, and based on how it's handled, then what we have been able to achieve is more of an increase in joy at work, even for those things that are really hard decisions. So let's talk about how to get help. So we think that you know a lot already about hybrid work interactions because we're guessing that you have been in hybrid situations before. So if you've worked in a collaborative virtual collaboration environment, if you have worked on teams that are, all over the place, even if you have teams that, somebody had to work from home because they were sick for a while, that has been a hybrid situation. So if you think back to that and ask yourself, what did you do that worked to build trust on the team? What reduced trust? And what would be an ideal week or day? These are great prompts for you to think through. Okay, well, let me think through and reflect on what I would like it to be like ideally for everyone, and what I've done in the past that either worked or didn't work that I can apply here, because I'm guessing there's quite a bit. And then virtual collaboration techniques, there are so many now. I mean, I would guess that you all have experienced all kinds of virtual software, virtual collaboration exercises. There are so many. We did a conversation with a team recently, and these are just the ones that they put up on a Jamboard. And so, and it was like instant, they were ready to go and share. So I'm sure quite a few things already. The other thing that we would suggest is to get your team to help. One of the things that we talk about a lot in the change world is a change network. And a change network does these things. They are usually a group of people who represent different stakeholders across the company or across an initiative. And, they are able to share insights from the people that they represent. So they represent their stakeholders and they advise leadership on, what can be done to make this easier. They represent the initiative back to their stakeholders, back to the people they represent. They raise risks about what could get in the way and, competing priorities, things like that. They also offer solutions that would not occur to anyone outside of that group that they represent. And then they connect people in. So they do all of these things. And I would say that in a situation like this, where this is potential change for your organization, that you could leverage a change network in a similar way, right? You could create a group of people to come together to basically do these things so that you as the leader don't have to come up with all the answers. You're basically saying, here's what we want to do, and we want to understand from the organization how we can make this easier, better for people to, work well and be able to focus on the work itself. So that's what this group can do. They don't really make the decision about what change happens. What they do is they make a lot of decisions, or they impact how a change is introduced, especially to their local area, which makes a huge difference typically in how it goes. And we did this for ourselves actually years ago. We had a team that was in what we call the pit of despair halfway through. And we did a lot to really re-energize first the leadership team to think differently about how they should lead their own teams using many of the techniques that we've talked about today. And then we had this big group meeting where we brought everyone together, and we basically demonstrated this new way of leaders thinking about leading the entire program team, which in this case was 250 people distributed all across the country. And it was such a big surprise and lift in engagement based on a survey that we did immediately following, that we created what we call the sustainability team, which now sounds like it's an environmental thing. So in the future iterations of it, we call it the Elevate team. But sustainability is a change management term, meaning sustain what you've achieved in terms of the change. So we created the sustainability team to sustain this engagement that we achieved and then sustain it for the next 18 months. This group was going to be together on a program that was really difficult, very, very hard every day. And was under incredible scrutiny by the entire organization and really expected to fail. So the sustainability team did amazing things to maintain and even increase engagement on this group of 250 people distributed across the US. They were highly dependent on each other to succeed. So just to recap, what we would say is tune in to how people are doing and feeling. Don't get frozen by it and what you find, because you may find a lot, but kind of get tuned into what's going on with them. And then set an intention. How do you want people to feel about the change process, and tune into how people are impacted, so you can create those conditions to make it easier. And then remember what you know, because you probably know a lot already about how to make a hybrid situation work. And of course, get help from your team if you can, because that will take some of the heavy lifting off of you. And we know that the more involvement you get, the more likely something will really, take hold. The change will take hold. So we wanted to share with you a couple of things. This is a report that we did called the Best Team Experience, which is a summary of data we collected from a lot of leadership teams over the years about the best team experience they ever had leading or being part of a team. So inside this report, it shows you what all the answers are, and then it actually gives you the questions that we use to collect the data, but also to help people create the intention that we spoke about here. And then just FYI, we're cultivating a community of joy at workers. We do have a guide to joy at work available out there, which gets into much more detail about what we mean by joy at work, the definition, and the dimensions that we've uncovered so far in the research that we've done.
Yeah, and I'm putting a link into the chat, just this is the link to our site. So we have the Best Team report out there, and you can see more about this research. So we're trying to keep publishing and updating what we're finding. And so that's on our website, and it's out there for free for people to check out. So when you get a minute, go take a look.
And that's it. That's what we wanted to share. So any questions or comments?
Hey, Roxanne, this is Porav. Hey, good to see you.
Hey.
Good to see you.
So quick question, and this is maybe not just germane to this topic, but more change management and just keeping an eye on how things are going in general. As you all, I think everyone's heard, we now live in the era of the Great Resignation. So my question is, you've got employers and teams that are already seeing enough attrition just because of marketplace condition. Do you have any suggestions on how do you try to distinguish what's just happening because people are looking for opportunities and they're finding them versus it is something that is specifically driven by what the organization is doing as part of a change?
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say that. We're being asked by our clients the same thing, right? So our clients are experiencing a lot of attrition, and the first impulse is to point the finger at the manager. it's just like an immediate reaction. And so we've had to we've cautioned against that because there is so much going on. To your point about the Great Resignation, but we've talked to people to get a little bit more into the situation. It runs the gamut, so we don't have specific data on it, but we can tell you that from our investigation with our own clients, some people are leaving purely for money reasons, right? This is their opportunity to move up. Some people have been wanting to leave for a while and just haven't made the jump. And what's interesting is how it's done, how it's handled by the company is having an impact on the people who are remaining, right? What we're getting is that people want us to answer the question, well, does leadership understand why we're having a retention issue? What are they doing in response? So just being able to say, here's what we're doing specifically, one of which is having these conversations with you, right? Is the part of the conversation. But also we're working on onboarding and training and development. Those are two other areas that have come up as good retention practices. So even though people who are already onboarded, right, already employees, they're impacted by how well other new people are onboarded. So hearing that we're working on onboarding for the company is providing comfort and actual happiness, presumably because they'll be less impacted, but also because it's a sign that leaders are paying attention. The other thing is we have asked to involve employees in the design of onboarding, which goes a long way, for morale. In other words, my voice is going to be heard in how onboarding is designed for our company. So it's really, this is a long answer, sorry, Parag, but what I would say is it's unclear, whether or not you have an internal problem with the company, causing morale issues, causing people to leave. Until you get closer, you have to get closer and ask the questions. And as you know, how you ask matters, right? As to whether or not people will tell you what's real. Even exit interviews, it's hard to get real answers. So you have to look at the data over time to see, are there any obvious themes that are coming out? Because, just a few people saying one thing can't necessarily put your hat on that.
That's fair. And I wasn't expecting a silver bullet, although I would have been extremely pleased if you had something. So I would gladly have taken it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, maybe the one thing that we there is a little silver bullet-ish that we've been pushing people is much we talk about communicating and over communicating,
Yeah.
also in this thing listening and maybe even over listening. So get involved way more in talking with what's going on with people in the organization to understand what is on their mind, so that you can help to parse through that without having to go down the more formal survey route or something else.
Yeah, and leaders are also doing things like spending more time with their teams. In other words, having more one-on-ones just to, check in, have, just more casual in order to do something proactive to keep the relationships going. Because it's definitely harder in this space.
Hello, this is Peter. I have a question to both of you. I'm going back to the beginning of the webinar in terms of tuning in, which caught my attention. The decision fatigue is a major problem these days. And I'm just wondering if you have a moment to elaborate on how you can reconcile decision fatigue within the change management practice.
Well, Peter, the first thing that comes to mind for me is around clarity. So part of that decision fatigue is we're leaving things out there for people to ponder. And if you know the answer, then getting that answer out and telling people that this is the answer helps to reduce that, because it takes some of those things out. One of the other things that I think does come up in change management, which again was not obvious to me, is coming back to tell people that you don't know. So getting your leaders to just communicate on a regular basis and commit to that regularity. That was something that Roxanne drove me to do. And even when I would be in front of the group and say, I'm coming back to tell you that I don't have anything new to tell you, but I'm committed to making sure that I stay in regular contact with you. It can help to alleviate people's fears, right? It's that whole process of people tend to go to the worst possible answer when there's a vacuum of information. And so at least tell them that it's not the worst answer. I don't actually know what it is right now, and I'll keep coming back to you. For me, was surprisingly valuable way to keep people more engaged and to reduce some of that decision fatigue.
Yeah, the other thing is this notion of commit to commit, which you may have heard of, right? I'm committing to tell you the answer by this later date. It also does a lot to calm people down. Okay, so I don't have to think about it or worry about it until here. That's another way to calm down decision fatigue.
Well, I really appreciate, very, very insightful. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Absolutely.
All right, gang, other thoughts, questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and we appreciate you guys being here. You'll be getting an email that'll indicate where you can look at the recording if you want to get back and check out what's going on with this. And please check out our website. We keep trying to post the latest things that we're finding, and are always very interested to hear what would be useful for you. So if you've got something, lay it on us, send it via email or put a comment in on the website, and we try and pursue those as well. But
yeah, right now we're thinking about things like, how do you make friends at work in a hybrid situation? How do you create connectedness at work in a hybrid situation? So we're pursuing these ideas, especially because it looks like we're going to be in this situation, in a hybrid situation for a long time to come. So we're looking at those questions. If you have other questions that you would like us to pursue, we're happy to put those in and look at those as well.
all right, everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.